Okay, just to start with, I thought the story we've read about, I'm going to say the word name in a moment, the mother of the family, is a story of life, isn't it? You know, she had her good times and the bad times. And I think certainly Henry and I, the last week has been a very strange one, having the marriage of our dear son, which is, you can imagine, very important to us. And some of you know him as a teenager, would know why. And then secondly, obviously, we've had Jane's funeral within 3 days of that. And so life is like that. You know, that's life. It's up and it's down. And so we battle with it in different ways. What I want to talk about today is traveling, really. Jess has arrived. I'm not sure how long she's going to stay, but some people come and they arrive and they stay, or they go somewhere else and they stay. And if I look around here and said to you, how many of you know someone in your family, yourself, or friends who's been a traveller, who's been a migrant? I'm guessing that probably all of us, if you're in Ivy, would be able to identify that. If I can have my first slide, that would be lovely, thank you. Ruth is a migrant, and that's the story I want to talk about today. But I want to tell you a story, a modern, well, not quite so modern story. This one's about 50 years old now. But it's about a friend of mine. Her name is Louisa, and I'll come back to that. It's spelled not the English way. And I first met her through a university friend who I was a roommate with. And it's a story, a bit of her life. Now, she was born in East Germany in late 1952, so she's about my age. Her parents were farmers in East Germany, and they lived in a little village, which we can see there is where the red dot is, just there. And I'm going to try and pronounce it. I got a rather poor grade in German when I did at O-level, but it's Grosswiller or something like that. It's a little farming village, all right? And it's they were farmers. And in December of that year, they decided they needed to get out because the restrictions of communism was beginning to impact on them, and they were at risk of all sorts of different things. Now, my friend at that time was a very, very ill baby. And so to get out of their village and travel, what they did was at night time, they got on a sledge, and she was in a pram on top of this sledge, and they worked their way to a road and got a taxi, and then they got a train, and that train took them into West Berlin, which is just there. Now, that journey was very risky because they could have been checked by East German guards all the way along. Now, because it was near Christmas, there weren't any guards around. So they got into East Germany, and there she was treated in a West German hospital, into Berlin, in West Berlin. And there she was treated in a hospital, and that probably saved her life as a young baby. After that, they were flown out, and you didn't go out of Germany from Berlin in a train, because again, you've got to go through East Germany. They were flown out from West Berlin to Hamburg, which is up there. Okay, so that was a beginning of her migration. And she grew up in Hamburg. Now, my friend, he was a flatmate of mine, a good friend of mine, part of the Christian Union there. He met her in Hamburg, and she became his girlfriend. So I met her when she came across to my uni occasionally, and she sometimes got subjected to my landlady's breakfast. She was called Mrs. L, and she always gave us, if you were having boiled eggs, you had 2 or 3 boiled eggs. If you had fish and chips, it was enormous in the breakfast. And Andy used to go like this because he didn't like that. But anyway, she was subjected to her breakfast. But I got to know her through Andy. Later on, Hilary and I met them again, actually in Hamburg. I was on a school trip, which Hilary came on as well. And that was a very difficult encounter because you could see their marriage was falling apart. And it was really quite hard for us to see them there like that. And the story, what happened after that was that they were due to come to England, and then he went off and paired up with her best friend. It's one of those stories. That's another story how that went on anyway. And she therefore had a job in England as a teacher. He stayed behind because he was a translator and could work anywhere. And she came to England. And we met her there about the time that Hillary was about 7 or 8 months pregnant. That's why our Rachel's got the name Louisa, spelt the German way. Because I was quite embarrassed by this. I felt guilty about what had happened to her. But she stayed in England. He stayed in Hamburg. He married 4 times in his life. So that's another story. But anyway, she came to England, and she's been a teacher in England, and she met and she married a guy from Poland in England. They were both teachers. And it was a story of migration. And she now lives in Cheltenham with her husband, and they do a lot of work with refugees. So that's a nice story for me. But I tell it, and I was thinking the other day, there's another interesting thing that came up. Some of you may know the word Kindertransport, which was the thing about bringing Jewish children in 1939 out of Germany to England. And I think it was 10,000 children were brought out that way, whose parents gave them up to keep them safe from Nazi persecution. One of those was called Sir Peter Hirsch. He's a very, very prominent and well-known physicist who died this year at the age of 100. I know his name because I'm one of those nerdy people who did physics as a degree at university, and he was well-known at that time. The other is an entrepreneur in technology, developing women's working in IT, developing a women's only business. And she has died recently. She's called Dame Stephanie Shirley. And she's a champion of, going to get this wrong, champion of honor, I think it's called. There's only 65 of those in the country. It's above being a sir. So there we are. So that's 2 stories of migration, or 3 stories of migration. And I just want to start by saying this. When we look at Ruth, there are so many different reasons why people move around the world, why they migrate. That's the first thing. And the second thing is it's always been happening, and it will always happen. And it always will be a debate. There was a debate in 1939 about whether Jewish children should be brought to UK. Like there's been a debate now about who comes to this country. And we're not the only country who has that debate. It's a debate that's been going on forever. And what I hope to do today is just to sort of reflect on how we, as Christians, should look at that. The second thing is, it's always, as I say, it's always been happening. And just to show you that, here we go. 2 things here, 2 verses here. Wasn't quite meant to come out like this. It was meant to, can you dot me out? Thank you. Okay, so the first one says, now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spoke unto Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over the Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. That's Joshua going into the promised land. Whole nation migrating. Next one. Then Moses set aside 3 cities east of the Jordan, to which anyone who had killed a person could flee. If they had unintentionally killed a neighbor without malice afterthought, they could flee unto one of those cities and save their life. That's called they were called cities of refuge, set up by in Judah to make sure that they could be people who made a big mistake, which they didn't mean to, could be protected, because the first thing that would happen would be revenge from the victim's family. So that was another idea of migration, you see, within a nation. And then there's further ones here. They were supposed to come up one at a time, these, but never mind. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love them as yourself, for you are foreigners in Egypt, and I am the Lord your God. And then another one, which should be interesting, we'll come back to this one. Let the Moabite fugitives stay with you, be their shelter from the destroyer. And the last one, we know, when he had gone, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child who was Jesus, there we are, well done, the word, and his mother, and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night and went to Egypt, where he stayed. So there we are. So there's sort of some examples of the fact that migration is mentioned a lot in the Bible. Now, the third thing here, and this picks up the story of Ruth, is often it's ordinary people who get caught up in extraordinary circumstances. I just think back to my friend Louisa. Her story is a remarkable story of a young baby who has now, in the age in his 70s now, has found life. So it's ordinary people who get caught up in all these stories. So we go back to the story of Ruth. Now, that's it, thank you. That's the journey. There's Judah on the left, and then Moab on the right. Just want to set the context of this story, though, by talking about the relationships between Judah and Moab. And it's like this. And again, here we go. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. Now, that's an unpleasant story. They got Lot drunk and they had babies by him because there was no men around to do that. Not a good start in life, probably. The older daughter had a son and she named him Moab, and he is the father of the Moabites of today. Secondly, then Israel sent messages to the king of Edom saying, give us permission to go through your country. This is as the nation of Israel was moving around. But the king of Edom would not listen. They also sent to the king of Moab, and he refused. So Israel stayed at Kadesh. And the third one from Deuteronomy, no Ammonite or Moabite or any other descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord, not even in the 10th generation. For they did not come to meet you with bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt. Then they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor in Aram, Naharaim, to produce a curse on you. However, the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam, but turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. Do not seek a treaty or friendship with them as long as you live. Okay, so there's a complicated relationship, isn't it? The Moabites and Israel, the tribes, didn't get on. So really, we've got here a fraught relationship between the two nations that Naomi was moving between, but still migration happened on the individual leveling. So what about Naomi then? Well, she's an ordinary family. She had a husband called Elimelech, two sons called Mahlon and Chilion, who moved to Moab, the hostile neighbor, and they moved because of famine. So they were there. And then the story is obviously that they married Moabite women. That's another interesting thing. They married women from a hostile nation, and they all lived together. And then her husband and then her two sons died. Now, the conduct of that is that for Moabite, any women in those days, if their husbands died and had no children, there's a big issue there. It's a big issue, much more than we would regard it today. And the twist, is what happened was then that when conditions improved in Judah, she decided to go back. And she encouraged her two daughters to stay to find husbands to marry so they could have their children. And then we had Ruth's response. So I have it up again, please. And this is it. Very powerful words, these. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her to stay. Now, we've got two women here, Ruth and Orpah. This is not a condemnation of Orpah. It's the way the two of them reacted differently. So why did Ruth return? Well, we're not actually told why. I've thought some things here. Maybe she was impressed by Naomi's family example of the Jewish faith. Maybe she was fearful of staying. Maybe the devotion to Naomi's loyalty, there was a good relationship between the two of them. Maybe it was the realization that Judah had better conditions, so it was worth becoming a refugee, using the advantages of now having a family connection. Lots of refugees do that. She was just a good character. Well, time will tell what her reasons were, but she went back. And I think there we get to the situation where Naomi's reaction is rather interesting. And it's this: don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Remember, good times, bad times. She reacts to the bad times that way. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. But the Lord has brought me back empty. How do we feel when the tough times come, you know? Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Now, their names are quite interesting because the name Naomi means pleasant and the name Mara means bitter. So in a sense, she's saying her feelings, her personality's changed a bit in this respect because of her circumstances. And it does raise that question, the reality of circumstances. Sometimes life's good, sometimes it's not so good. How do we react to that? So what can we take from this chapter? Well, one thing, life is unpredictable. I think some people say we're living in unpredictable times. Hilary and I went to a place called Woodspring Priory yesterday. It's down near Weston, just near a place called Sandbay, if you know that. And there's a priory which was being renovated in Henry VIII's time. The day before the dissolution of the monasteries was announced, they were into a rebuilding project because they'd had a massive sponsor that given them lots of money to rebuild their priory. And they were in the middle of it. So one day they were rebuilding their priory. The next day, it was closed down. Now, I thought that's an interesting story of life happening just like that. I saw a picture in Warsaw when we were in forgotten place we're in. Where were we in? Poland. Krakow, that's right, thank you, Hilary. Yeah, and we were there, and there's a picture on the September 2nd, I think it was, in the sunshine, enjoying themselves, all the people out in the square, except for the Germans invaded. So yeah, so life's unpredictable. I think that's one thing that we have to manage. And I think we have to think about the thing about being thankful in all circumstances, not just the good times. Remember what Paul says, I have learned to be content in, and so on. Jane's example, what a wonderful way it was talked about Jane's resilience and her love of her Lord, even in the most difficult times for her. What a testimony that was. And hearing, you know, sort of her colleagues and friends and so on talking about that. And I think we need to be aware that many migrants have been born into very different circumstances. Don't judge them for what they do to better themselves. I just think that's something that comes to my mind in the language around migration today, that we need to be really careful about that and we don't make assumptions. And I also think to myself, if we're in good circumstances, be grateful to God. Don't be complacent. Don't be judgmental of others. Just be grateful to God that we happen to be in a position that some of us happen to have been born into a very good country where it's very easy to live and others haven't. You know, it's not, we don't have rights by being born as English or whatever. And that's something that always I try and think about in those circumstances. And also to remember that every person who travels has a different personality, comes from different circumstances, and we need to show compassion as Christians to all. I think Jesus gave that example to us right the way through his life, of compassion to all. And I think we need to remember it's very complex, migration, the reasons for migration, the stories around migration. Think about that relationship in Moab. Think about their warring nations, Moab and Judah, and yet there's that welcome all those who are fugitives from Moab. You know, this sort of tension really, just because someone's a particular country doesn't make them any different from us in that sort of way. So there's that. And I think it's very complex, and we need to remember, beware of easy solutions or easy opinions. People say, oh, if we just did this or that, it's not like that. Another thing I'd like to say is, as a Christian, competition is good. Now, some of you might know I'm rather keen on rugby. I'm a bit small for playing it these days, but anyway, and I love watching rugby. And I think if you've watched the Women's World Cup, there's a whole spirit of really good competition. But at the end of it, they're friends, and they sing their national anthems and so on. But they're friends at the end. There's been some lovely examples of friendship in those games at the end. And flags there, great, but beware of the message of flags these days. And I think and it's actually read something about this morning, but actually, competition is good. We need to be careful about nationalism. We need to think about that. And so how do we deal with this in a complex way? Because there's no easy answers. Well, I just think if we happen to come into contact with individual migrants, let's love them. I think the story we talked, the homeless project, the night shelter, the winter shelter, lots of those people are migrants who are coming through and beginning to establish their lives. When we have to deal, there are the big issues we've got to deal with. Let's be sensitive. Things like hotel accommodation, boats, deportation, houses of multiple occupation, which cause tension to people at times. How do we deal with those? And how do we deal with those with difficult views? I'll finish this with a story. I play badminton a bit, and we have a Scotsman there. Sadly, he's not well now. But he used to sit and make very strong and angry comments about migrants, and they ought to go home. And I sat there, and I don't know, how do you deal with that? And I haven't quite got round to knowing how I deal with that yet. But the one thing that came to my mind, I thought, I'm not going to be able to say this, otherwise I would have a punch-up, was, well, you're Scots, mate. You're living in England. You're a migrant. You've made your money out of England, But I didn't say it because I thought I might end up being in a little bit of an argument at the end of that. But we've got to find our ways of trying to work our way through this situation as Christians. And it's big, and it's not going to go away. And we've got the example of Ruth, and we've got the example of her example of that story. And there's more to come on that story, but it's something that's really interesting. But it's very challenging, isn't it? Trying to work our way through these complex issues. But let's keep trying. Let's keep working. Let's keep praying about it. Let's keep thinking about it and making sure that we behave in a way that the Lord wants us to behave in this situation. And, we forget in this country when people put up flags and say we want to be English or British. What does that mean? Well, we're a Mongol race. We're a mixture of all sorts, and it's our story over the many, many years. So just the sort of thoughts for you. No easy answers, no right answers, no wrong answers. I don't know where we go, but we've got to keep our minds on this as Christians. How do we love our neighbour as ourselves? And how do we do that in these complex situations? So there we go. God bless you.